At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The universe had a specific sound for you are deeply, profoundly, and irrevocably screwed. And it was the roar of 60,000 aliens who wanted to see you turned into a smear. Cadet Oliver Arkwright felt that sound resonate in the bones of his jaw. It vibrated through the composite metal floor of the tunnel and up his legs, a physical force threatening to buckle his knees. He gripped the hilt of his sword, the worn leather of the handle a familiar groundling comfort against the sterile chrome of the corridor. The sword felt alive in his hand, a silent partner in this suicidal symphony. He called it Echo. It was the only piece of home he had left, and the only key to saving it. Home was a rock, a specific rock, third from a middling yellow star, whose people had only just learned to whisper beyond worlds when the galaxy at large was already shouting. And on that rock, deep beneath the Welsh mountains where his ancestors had once pulled coal and iron from the earth, the Arkwright Forge had burned for 10 generations. They were not smiths of plowshares or horseshoes. They were artists of resonance, students of a physics so old and intuitive it had been dismissed as myth. They didn't just shape metal, they taught it to sing. They folded layers of hyper-tempered steel and exotic alloys sourced from meteor fragments, hammering them into alignment, not on a molecular level, but on a vibrational one. Each blade had a unique frequency, a song that was its soul. Echo was the masterpiece, the culmination of centuries of knowledge, a blade that didn't cut by shearing bonds but by persuading them to fall apart. And Orion Core Acquisitions, a subsidiary of the galaxy's largest arms manufacturer, wanted it. Not just the sword, but the forge itself. The land, the secrets, the legacy. They had found an ancient forgotten corporate charter from humanity's first colonial expansion, a legal document no one had remembered to nullify that gave them mineral rights to the entire mountain range. Ethel didn't want minerals. They wanted a monopoly on the future of warfare, and the Arkwright Forge represented a paradigm they couldn't control, replicate, or purchase. So they chose to bury it under the weight of their legal machine. The seizure was imminent. The only loophole, the only obscure clause in a galactic law that could override a corporate claim of that magnitude, was the champion's prerogative, an archaic right granted to the winner of the galactic gauntlet, a right to make a single binding legal decree. "Just remember the plan," a voice crackled in his earpiece, a low, gravelly timbre that could strip paint. "The prize money is useless if Orion Core Acquisitions finalizes the seizure. Only the champion's prerogative can nullify the contract. Let him get arrogant." "The plan is to win a galaxy-wide death tournament to untangle a legal mess," Oliver murmured, his eyes fixed on the blinding white light at the end of the tunnel. He started humming, a low, nervous rendition of an ancient Earth tune about rolling stones and painted doors. "The plan for what happens next is a little fuzzier." "The plan is you don't die," Linnell Voln replied, her tone devoid of sentiment. "The fuzziness is you figuring out how. Now stop humming. You sound like a leaky gas pipe." A smile touched Oliver's lips, sharp and quick, a fleeting mask for the terror churning in his gut. He stepped out of the tunnel and into the pandemonium of the galactic gauntlet area. The light was blinding, a kaleidoscope of holographic advertisements for Orion Core armaments, energy drinks made from fermented nebula gas, and luxury Hoover yachts he couldn't afford to look at. Thousands of floating camera drones buzzed through the air like metallic insects, their lenses hungry. In the center of the grav-lifted arena floor stood his opponent, a creature that looked like a tectonic plate and had gained sentience and a bad attitude. The announcer's voice, a synthetic baritone amplified to godlike volume, boomed across the stadium. And in this corner, weighing in at 312 kilos of granite-hardened muscle, the pride of Goric Quarry worlds, the unbreakable, the unstoppable, Ragnar! The crowd went insane. And his opponent, the announcer's voice dripped with condescension, hailing from the Sol System's quaint little third planet, Cadet Oliver Arkwright of Earth. A polite, scattered spattering of applause quickly drowned out by a fresh wave of derisive laughter. Oliver walked to his starting mark, Echo held loosely at his side. He could see Ragnar clearly now. The Goric was a mountain of craggy gray flesh, encased in the finest personal armor credits could buy. The Orion Core Aegis series. It gleamed under the arena lights, a seamless suit of bonded nanofiber that was marketed as impervious to everything short of a direct hit from a ship's main cannon. Ragnar threw his head back and let out a laugh that sounded like rocks in a blender. "Is that a joke?" he boomed, his voice rumbling through the floor. He pointed a thick, three-fingered hand at Echo. "Did your little primate tribe send you to a duel with a museum piece?" The crowd howled. Even the announcer chuckled. A bold choice from the human, folks. It appears he's brought a sharpened metal bar, a fascinating archaeological find." Oliver just stood there, letting the mockery wash over him. He could hear Linnell in his ear. "Good, he's arrogant. Now make him stupid." The match start siren blared. Ragnar didn't even bother raising his fists. Instead, he did something that made a collective gasp ripple through the arena. With a theatrical gesture, he tapped a control on his gauntlet. The faint, wavering haze of his personal energy shield vanished. Then he spread his massive arms wide, exposing the polished, flawless expanse of his chest plate. "Come on, little human," Ragnar bellowed, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'll give you a free shot. Let's see your grandfather's letter opener scratch my paint. Show the galaxy what Terran technology can do." Oliver took a slow, deliberate breath. The roar of the crowd faded into a dull hum. The buzzing drones, the flashing ads, the sheer, overwhelming alienness of it all melted away. There was only him, Ragnar, and the 34 inches of resonant steel in his hand. He remembered his grandfather's words, spoken over the roar of the deep earth forge. "Don't force it, Oliver. Don't try to break the stone. Just listen to its song and teach it a new one." He shifted his weight, sinking into a classic swordsman's stance. He raised Echo, the blade pointing toward the ceiling. For a moment, he was back in the dusty training yard behind the forge, the smell of coal smoke and superheated metal in the air. "He's posturing?" the announcer said, confused. Ragnar snorted. "He's praying to his ancestral gods. It won't help." Oliver moved in an explosion of motion. 3 swift, economical steps that closed the distance in a heartbeat. He didn't aim for a joint or a weak point. He aimed for the dead center of Ragnar's chest, the most heavily armored part of his body. He brought the sword down in a single fluid, unstoppable arc. A Zornhau, the wrathful cut, perfected over 1,000 years of human conflict. The expected clang of metal on the impenetrable armor never came. Instead, the moment the blade's edge kissed the Orion Core chest plate, it sang, a high, pure, resonant note that cut through the arena's din like a sliver of glass. The shriek of molecular bonds failing. A spider web of incandescent hairline fractures erupted from the point of contact, glowing like circuitry. It looked like a sheet of ice struck by a tuning fork that vibrated at the frequency of doom. The pristine armor offered no resistance. It simply disintegrated. An explosive cloud of nanofiber dust and shattered micro-ceramic lattice burst outward from Ragnar's chest. The air smelled sharply of ozone and superheated metal. The blade didn't cut the armor. It simply told the armor to cease to exist in its path. and the armor obeyed. For a nanosecond, there was a void in the shape of a sword's edge. Then the blade's unstoppable momentum carried it through. The blade, now unimpeded, plunged through the exposed flesh and bone beneath. Ragnar's right arm, its armored connection point obliterated, was thrown from his body by the sheer concussive force, landing with a wet, heavy thud several feet away. The superheated dust from the disintegrated armor pattered onto the arena floor like metallic rain. Silence. A profound, galaxy-wide, what-the-hell-just-happened silence. Ragnar looked down at the gaping, cauterized ruin of his shoulder, then at his severed arm lying on the floor. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide with a disbelief so absolute it was almost comical, rolled up into his head, and the mountain of a warrior collapsed like a dynamited building. Oliver stood over him, breathing hard, Echo's blade pristine and humming softly as the kinetic feedback was absorbed by its dampening core. He had won. The arena was so quiet he could hear the fizz of a spilled energy drink in the stands. Then, chaos. "You didn't just win, kid. You broke their galaxy." Linnell Vaughn stood with all four of her arms crossed, a posture that made her look like an impassable Tetrarch fortress. She watched Oliver pace the small, sterile backstage room, still buzzing with a cocktail of adrenaline and disbelief. He'd barely had time to process the win before a swarm of gauntlet officials had hustled him off the arena floor, their faces a mixture of awe and panic. "I was just trying to get to the next round," Oliver said, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. He couldn't stop looking at Echo, which he had carefully placed on a nearby table. It looked so unassuming, so simple. One step closer to the prerogative. "You took a step all right," Linnell said, her voice grim. "Straight onto the balance sheet of Orion Core Armaments. You think this was about a trophy? The Gauntlet is a showroom. They just watched their flagship product, the armor that protects half the admirals in the Concordant fleet, get turned into dust by a backworld sword." Before Oliver could respond, the air in the center of the room wavered, distorting the view behind it like heat haze. A holographic projector whirred to life, coalescing into the image of a tall, slender being. He was a Carinian, with skin the color of polished bone and eyes like chips of obsidian. He wore a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed grown rather than woven. A polite, predatory smile played on his thin lips. "Cadet Arkwright," the hologram said, his voice as smooth and cool as silk. "I am Administrator Caius, CEO of Orion Core Armaments. My sincere congratulations on your most surprising victory." Oliver shot a look at Linnell, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. "Mr. Caius," Oliver said, forcing a casual tone. "Thanks. Glad you enjoyed the show." "Oh, I did," Caius purred. "So much that I am prepared to make you an offer. Your family's situation, the foreclosure action by our acquisition subsidiary, a clerical error, I'm sure. It can all be made to disappear. In exchange for the weapon, of course. A fascinating anomaly. I will be very generous." Oliver felt a surge of defiant pride. This creature, this corporate predator, was dangling his family's legacy in front of him like a treat, assuming it could be bought. He saw a product, an asset. He didn't see the sweat of 10 generations of Arkwright Smiths. He didn't see the art, the soul. Oliver walked over to the table and picked up his sword, the leather grip feeling like a handshake from his ancestors. He looked directly into the hologram's black eyes. "Mr. Caius," he said, his voice ringing with newfound confidence, "I see you have an emotional attachment to my family's property. My answer is no. The sword isn't for sale." Caius's polite smile didn't waver, but his obsidian eyes grew colder. "I see. A sentimental position. That is a quaint notion. We find that all assets, Cadet, sentimental or otherwise, eventually have a liquidation price. We will find yours. Enjoy your victory while it lasts." The hologram vanished. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the ventilation system. Linnell let out a long, slow breath. "Well," she said, uncrossing her arms, "the good news is we know exactly who we're fighting now." "And the bad news?" Oliver asked, his heart thudding against his ribs. "The bad news," her 4 eyes focused into hard points, "is that we're now officially in the asset liquidation business, and we're the asset." "It's too quiet," Oliver muttered, scanning the corridor. They were in a mandatory post-match media debriefing, a tedious affair filled with babbling reporters and corporate sycophants. Linnell had insisted they leave Echo back in their quarters, but not without taking precautions. "Caius is a CEO, not a street thug," Linnell said, her voice low as she guided him through the throng. "He won't send a squad of goons kicking down the door, not yet. His first move will be clean, corporate espionage, acquisition." When they returned to their small functional living quarters, everything looked untouched. The beds were made, the sparse furniture was in place. Echo lay on the workbench where Oliver had left it, looking inert and ancient. "See? All good," Oliver said with a relieved sigh. "Is it?" Linnell said, her voice sharp. She pointed to the floor by the workbench. "New decorations." Oliver looked closer. There were faint scorch marks on the floor, like tiny black starbursts. Scattered around were small, twisted pieces of a black composite material and a smear of purplish fluid that was definitely not hydraulic fluid. On the wall, the ventilation grate was bent outward as if kicked open from the inside. Oliver knelt. "What happened?" "My welcome mat," Linnell said with grim satisfaction. She walked to the workbench. "They expected high-tech defenses. Lasers, scanners, static fields. So I gave them low-tech physics." She tapped the heavy metal bench. "Underneath is a gravitic anchor plate, keyed to a pressure plate right here." She indicated the scorched patch of floor. "But it's not a wide-field anchor. It's focused. And it doesn't care about organic matter. It only cares about ferrous metal." Oliver's eyes widened. "Weapons. Armor." "Exactly. Our cloaked thief steps on the plate to grab the sword," Linnell explained, miming the action. "The anchor activates. It doesn't pin him. It pins his gear, his rifle, his sidearm, the magnetic clasps on his armor, the vibro knife in his boot. Everything metal gets slammed to the floor with about 50 Gs of force, with him still attached to it." The scene played out in Oliver's mind. The thief, suddenly and violently pinned by his own equipment, helpless. "So, how did he get away?" "He paid the price," Linnell said, nudging a scorched piece of armor plating with her boot. "Standard Orion Core infiltration suit. They have emergency explosive bolts to jettison the armor plating in case of structural failure, or, apparently, when you get nailed to the floor by a grumpy Tetrarch's junkyard trap." He blew his gear off, probably broke a few ribs from the recoil, and crawled out through the vent like the worm he is. She picked up a single discarded item the thief had left behind in his panicked flight, a cracked cloaking field generator. He got away, but he left a piece of himself behind, a message from Caius. The subtle approach has failed. Oliver looked from the mess on the floor to the sword, then to his mentor. "So, what's the non-subtle route look like?" A smile touched Linnell's lips, one that promised violence. "Probably a lot like the service corridors on Deck Gamma 9. Stick close. The fun's just starting." The service corridors of a galactic hub station were a universe away from the polished chrome and holographic glitz of the public areas. Here, the future was grimy, jury-rigged, and smelled faintly of leaking coolants and recycled water. Exposed power conduits snaked along the walls, spitting angry blue sparks. Steam hissed from leaky pipes, casting the narrow passageway in a perpetual shifting fog. It was the perfect place for an ambush. "Heads up," Linnell grunted, her 2 right arms already reaching for the pulse pistols holstered at her hips. They appeared from the shadows ahead and behind, 6 of them. They wore black form-fitting tactical gear, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace that screamed professional. Orion Corps' asset retrieval specialists. "Caius sends his regards," the leader said, his voice a synthesized rap. "The asset, the blade and its wielder, are to be acquired. We've been authorized to be persuasive." Oliver drew echo, the blade seeming to drink the dim light. "My family has a strict, no unsolicited acquisitions policy," he shot back, a grin plastered on his face to hide the frantic beating of his heart. "It's on our letterhead. You can file a complaint with our accounts department, but they're a bit backed up right now." A specialist lunged, his high-frequency vibro knife humming with energy. Oliver parried. The moment the two blades met, Echo sang its deadly song. It wasn't an EMP or a short circuit. A jarring, resonant shimmer ran up the specialist's knife. The complex micro-ceramic power grid within the hilt, vibrating with a frequency it was never designed to handle, shattered into a million inert shards. The weapon died with a pathetic, choked squeal, its hum silenced forever. The specialist stared at his now useless hilt in shock. An opening Oliver used to slam his pommel into the man's visor, cracking it. Linnell's movements were a paradox of chaos and purpose. A pistol in each upper hand laid down suppressing fire, while her lower arms, armed with short, heavy blades, deflected and parried. She moved like a dancer, using her size not as a liability in the tight space, but as a wall of unstoppable momentum. Oliver, meanwhile, was a flicker. He couldn't match their strength, so he used speed and environment. He ducked under a wild swing from a stun baton, the electrical discharge crackling inches from his hair, and slammed the flat of Echo's blade against a junction box on the wall. A shower of sparks erupted, and his attacker stumbled back, momentarily blinded. Oliver used the opening not to kill, but to disable. A clean slice, severing the power cable to the man's baton. Another specialist charged, trying to overwhelm him with brute force. Oliver parried, letting the man's momentum carry him forward, then used his hip to throw him against one of the sparking power conduits. The specialist convulsed and dropped, his suit smoking. They fought back to back, Linnell's heavy, powerful strikes creating openings that Oliver exploited with lightning-fast counters. It was a brutal symphony of steel and plasma, a Tetrarch battle dance and human swordsmanship fused into a single lethal unit. Within a minute, it was over. 4 of the specialists were down, groaning and twitching. The other 2 had vanished back into the shadows they'd emerged from. Oliver leaned against the grimy wall, chest heaving. "Well," he panted, a manic grin on his face. "That was invigorating." Linnell ejected the spent energy cells from her pistols. She slapped fresh ones home in a single fluid motion. That was Caius asking politely one last time. From here on out, he stops asking. Back in their quarters, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind the dull ache of bruises and the cold sting of fear. Linnell had reinforced the door with a portable maglock and was now patching up a shallow cut on Oliver's arm with a dermal regenerator. The little device hummed quietly, its green light a stark contrast to the room's stillness. The only other sound was the soft scrape of the dermal regenerator on skin. For the first time since the gauntlet began, Oliver's well of sarcastic banter had run dry. He just sat there, watching her work, the reality of men in black armor trying to kill him settling into his bones. He was just a kid from a backwater planet who was good with a sword. He was in way over his head. Linnell seemed to sense his mood. She finished sealing the cut and dabbed it clean. As she put the regenerator away, she unconsciously traced a thin, pale scar that snaked across the back of one of her lower hands. "This was a gift," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "From Orion Corps." Oliver looked up, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. What happened? Her 4 eyes seemed to gaze at something far away, a memory replaying behind them. "The last boy I trained with this much fire, his name was Ren. He wasn't human, he was Lyran, fast as light, fought with a pair of energy tonfas. He was brilliant, a true artist." She paused, her gravelly voice softening. It was a different tournament on a different station, 5 rotations ago. Ren was an orphan, a street kid. He fought with a joy I'd never seen. He saw patterns in combat the way a musician hears a melody. He made it to the semifinals just like you. Caused a few upsets, beat a corporate-sponsored favorite. That got the attention of a corporation Orion Corps was trying to muscle out of the market. Her voice turned to gravel. They didn't wait for the next match. They called it a training accident, a cycle later. That his own Tonfa's overloaded in his quarters. A lie. I got there too late. I saw the scorch marks on the wall. The blast pattern wasn't from a contained overload. It was from external weapons. An Orion Corps pacification squad. They didn't even try to hide it well from anyone who knew what to look for. She looked down at the scar on her hand. I was there. I pulled him out of the fire. He was gone. This scar is my reminder of the cost of their games, of my failure. She finally met his eyes, and for the first time, Oliver saw past the cynical, battle-hardened mentor. He saw a fierce, protective loyalty fueled by old pain. Her voice was low and intense. They don't play fair, Oliver. They don't play at all. This is not a game to them, it's a balance sheet. And you are a liability that needs to be erased. I didn't stop them then. I'm not making that mistake again. The cantina was in the station's underbelly, a place the tourist maps pretended didn't exist. The air was thick with alien smoke, the clatter of gambling dice, and the low thrum of an overloaded power grid. It was called the Leaky Airlock, and it was the kind of place you went when you needed information you couldn't get through official channels. Linnell's contact was a wiry, four-eyed Varian named Fizz, who looked like a nervous bird made of pipe cleaners. He was an info broker, and his talons drummed a frantic rhythm on the sticky tabletop as he spoke in a hushed, conspiratorial squawk.
"It's bad, Linnell. Real bad,"
Fizz chirped, his head darting around.
"Caius isn't just leaning on people anymore. He's dropped a boulder. There's a no-questions-asked bounty on the sword. Enough to buy a small moon, and a separate kill order on the kid. Open contract. Every bounty hunter, merc, and desperate lowlife from here to the Outer Rim is going to be coming for you."
Oliver took a sip of the murky beverage Linnell had ordered for him. It tasted like fermented regret. "So, we're popular." Fizz ignored him, his focus entirely on Linnell.
"This is Orion Corps Black Ops level, Linnell. They've locked down the private transport manifests, blocked all non-scheduled flights off station. You're boxed in."
"He's trying to corner us," Linnell rumbled. "Force us to play in his arena, on his terms."
"Exactly,"
Fizz squawked, agitated.
"You've got your semi-final match tomorrow. He's got you right where he wants you."
"Thanks, Fizz," Linnell said, sliding a credit chip across the table. The Varian's claw snatched it so fast it was a blur.
"Just watch your back, Linnell,"
Fizz said, already scurrying away in the crowd.
"Cassius is not the kind of guy who leaves loose ends."
As they left the cantina and headed back into the dimly lit serviceways, a cold knot formed in Oliver's stomach. 1,000 unseen eyes seemed to track them from the shadows. The entire criminal underworld was now part of Caius's army. They weren't just being hunted by a corporation anymore. They were being hunted by a city. The arena for the semi-final was smaller, more intimate, designed for speed and agility. Oliver's opponent was a Corinian, a member of Caius's own species, a lithe assassin who moved like smoke and wielded 2 wickedly curved energy daggers. The match was supposed to be a test of pure skill. It was, Oliver realized within the first 30 seconds, a complete setup. The Corinian was unnaturally fast. His movements were too sharp, his reflexes too perfect. Oliver had fought fast opponents before, but this was different. This was chemical. An illegal combat stimulant, Oliver guessed, one that wouldn't show up on the standard pre-match talk screen. It was Caius's first move, subtle enough to be deniable. Then the arena itself turned against him. He lunged, and his right foot, which should have found purchase on the textured floor, instead slid out from under him as if he'd stepped on a patch of ice. A jolt of panic shot through him, and he barely managed to twist his body into a roll, the assassin's energy dagger hissing past his ear. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. "Technical difficulties with the arena's friction plating in Section Gamma," the announcer's voice declared smoothly. "Our apologies." It happened again. He feinted left, and the floor beneath his pivot foot became frictionless. For a terrifying split second, his leg went out from under him, and only years of brutal training allowed him to convert the fall into a controlled slide. Sections of the floor would suddenly become coated in slick sheen, keyed to his specific weight and boot sole signature. It was brilliant, insidious sabotage. Caius could claim it was just a series of unfortunate random glitches. "He's trying to make you look clumsy," Linnell's voice said in his ear, tight with anger. "Make the kill look like an accident." Oliver gritted his teeth. "Fine. You want to change the rules? Let's play." Instead of avoiding the slick spots, he started using them. He'd intentionally step on one, using the sudden lack of friction to launch himself into a dizzying spin, his sword a flashing arc of steel that forced the assassin to backpedal. He treated the treacherous floor not as a hazard, but as a tool. He slid, he spun, he vaulted. He turned Caius's carefully planned sabotage into a spectacular, improvised display of acrobatic combat. But it wasn't effortless. Each slide was a gamble, each spin a battle against vertigo, his muscles screaming with the effort of constant, minute corrections. The Carinian, jacked up on stimulants, was built for linear speed and aggression. He couldn't adapt to Oliver's unpredictable three-dimensional attacks. Oliver slid under a sweeping attack, hooked his leg around the assassin's ankle on a normal patch of flooring, and sent the Carinian sprawling onto one of the frictionless zones. The assassin shot across the floor like a puck on an air hockey table, crashing into the arena wall. Before the Carinian could recover, Oliver was on him, the point of echo resting gently against his throat. The match was over. The crowd, initially confused, erupted into a roar of genuine appreciation for the sheer, audacious skill they had witnessed. Oliver had been cheated, and he had won anyway. The victory was exhilarating, but it drew more unwanted attention. As they were leaving the arena, two figures in immaculate gray uniforms blocked their path. They were tall, stoic, and bore the insignia of the Deneb hegemony, Orion Corps' biggest corporate rival. "Cadet Arkwright," the lead figure said, his voice a polished, pleasant baritone. "A truly masterful performance. My name is Prefect Gallus. The Deneb hegemony has been watching your progress with great interest." "I'm flattered," Oliver said, his hand instinctively resting on Echo's hilt. "We are aware of the difficulties you've been experiencing with Administrator Caius," Gallus continued, his smile never touching his eyes. "Orion Corps' business practices are notoriously aggressive. We would like to make you a counteroffer." He gestured to his aide, who produced a data slate. "The hegemony is prepared to offer you full protection. We will countermand Orion Corps' legal actions against your family, and a sponsorship contract with a signing bonus that would make their initial offer seem like an insult. All we ask in return is that you share the metallurgical secrets of your fascinating blade." Beneath the polite words, it was the same predatory bargain Caius had offered, merely wrapped in a different flag. Oliver didn't even have to think about it. "The forge that made this sword is my family's. Its secrets aren't for sale, to anyone." Prefect Gallus's pleasant smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "A principled, if short-sighted stance. The offer stands, should you reconsider your position. Caius is not known for his subtlety when his investments are threatened." The two hegemony officers gave a stiff bow and walked away. As soon as they were out of earshot, Linnell scoffed. "Vultures." "What do you mean?" Oliver asked. "Don't mistake their politeness for a lack of interest," she said, her eyes tracking the retreating figures. "They're not your friends. They'll just wait for Caius to bloody his hands trying to take the sword from you by force, Then they'll swoop in to rescue you, pick up the pieces, and take what they want. Either way, they get the blade, and you're just a footnote. Oliver felt a new kind of dread. He was a piece of meat caught between two starving wolves. Caius's subtlety had officially run out of patience. The next attack came without warning. Oliver and Linnell were cutting through a packed transit hub when the station's alert klaxons began to shriek. The civilian traffic, hoverbikes, transport skiffs, and public transit pods panicked, creating instant chaos. Through the maelstrom they came, 4 of them, on sleek black enforcement-grade hover skiffs. They weren't asset retrieval specialists anymore. These were Caius's elite guard, cyborgs. Their bodies were a horrific fusion of polished chrome and vat-grown muscle, their eyes glowing with malevolent red light. They were armed with military-grade repeating laser cannons. The pretense of a deniable operation vanished. This was a declaration of war. "Grab a skiff!" Linnell yelled over the roar of the engines and weapons fire. She hot-wired a 2-seater cargo skiff in seconds, shoving Oliver into the passenger seat as laser blasts stitched a pattern across the deck plating where they'd just been standing. The energy screamed as Linnell slammed the throttle, lurching them into the crowd transit lanes. A high-speed chase through the metallic canyons of a space station was a new kind of terror. They weaved through panicked civilian traffic, the cyborgs in hot pursuit, their laser fire relentless. A blast clipped the tail of a luxury hover car, sending it spinning into a support pillar with a sickening crunch. "Their targeting computers are slave to our heat signature," Linnell shouted, banking hard around a massive holographic billboard. "They'll anticipate our every move." Oliver's mind raced. Computers. They relied on predictive algorithms. They couldn't account for pure, unadulterated human insanity. His eyes landed on a colossal, unshielded ventilation fan, its blades the size of small buildings, spinning slowly in a massive intake shaft, a relic from the station's original construction, too big to replace. "Get me close to that fan," Oliver yelled. "Are you insane? The turbulence will tear us apart. Just do it!" Linnell, trusting him with a faith that was terrifying in its own right, angled the skiff towards the monstrous fan. The cyborgs followed, their targeting lasers painting the back of their skiff. "Now, veer off at the last second and cut the inertial dampeners," Oliver commanded. It was a move from a pre-gravity physics textbook, a slingshot maneuver, foundational, stupid, and utterly unpredictable. Linnell wrenched the controls. The skiff bucked wildly as they entered the fan's powerful gravitic pull. For a heart-stopping moment, they were dragged sideways, directly toward the spinning blades. Then Linnell cut the dampeners. The raw, unfiltered physics of the maneuver took over. Their skiff was whipped around the edge of the massive fan housing like a stone in a sling, accelerated to a velocity their engine could never have achieved on its own. The cyborg's targeting computers, unable to process the non-standard gravity-assisted trajectory, fired where they should have been. The 4 concentrated beams of laser fire meant for the skiff instead blasted into the fan's central axle. The ancient mechanism seized with a groan that shook the entire sector, and one of the colossal blades tore loose. The pursuing skiffs flew directly into the path of the cartwheeling blade. The collision turned the transit lane into a momentary sun, a silent, blossoming flower of fire and shrapnel. They shot out the other side, the skiff rattling and groaning, and vanished into the labyrinth maintenance tunnels before any station security could respond. They found refuge in a long abandoned cargo bay, the size of a cathedral and just as silent. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaky ceiling conduit, echoing in the vast empty space. Linnell was checking the skiff for damage while Oliver tried to get his heart to stop hammering against his ribs. "That was a one-time trick, kid," Linnell said, her voice echoing in the cavernous bay. "Caius just showed his hand. He's willing to risk open warfare in a civilian sector to get you. We need to understand why." "He wants the sword," Oliver said simply, "and he wants to be sure his subsidiary gets my family's forge." "It's more than that," Linnell countered, turning to face him. Her 4 eyes were deadly serious.
I've been digging through some old networks Fizz gave me access to. Orion Core doesn't just supply armor for the Gauntlet. They are the sole exclusive armor provider for the 3rd, 4th, and 9th fleets of the Galactic Concordat, the most decorated fleets in the service. She let that sink in. Think about it, Oliver. Your sword isn't just a threat to a corporate product line. It's an existential threat to the entire defensive doctrine of nearly half the Concordat's military. If a single blade, forged with ancestral techniques, can negate the most advanced armor in the galaxy, what does that mean for their cruisers, their battle stations? The entire military balance of power is built on the assumption that Orion Core armor is unbeatable. The weight of her words settled on him. This was so much bigger than a tournament or his family's forge. He was holding a key that could unlock galaxy-wide chaos. Caius can't let that secret out, Linnell continued, her voice low and grim. He can't risk you or that sword falling into the hands of the Deneb hegemony or a hostile government. He won't just try to kill you anymore. He will burn this entire station to the ground to contain you. They were trapped, hunted, outgunned. Despair settled in his gut, a cold, heavy anchor. But then, a spark of Arkwright defiance caught a fire in Oliver's chest. He looked at Echo, then at Linnell. Running was over. Hiding was over. Okay, Oliver said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He wants to silence me? Fine. He looked up at Linnell, his eyes blazing with a new, terrifying idea. We give him the biggest megaphone in the galaxy. Linnell's eyes narrowed in thought. He'll lock the place down, jam communications, turn it into his own kill box. Exactly, Oliver said. And if he wants to take direct, real-time control of the arena's security, its blast doors, its internal comms, what does he have to do? Linnell's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding in her 4 eyes. To micromanage a coup like that, he'd have to bridge his secure command network with the arena's local servers. It would create a temporary, high-risk vulnerability. A vulnerability you could exploit? Oliver pressed. A slow, predatory grin spread across Linnell's face. If he's that arrogant, and I can get to a terminal, I could gut his entire system from the inside out. It's a long shot, Oliver. It's the only shot we have, Oliver replied. The plan was no longer just to survive or win. It was to turn Caius's own stage into the trial that would destroy him. The atmosphere in the arena for the final match was a crackling storm. The air itself seemed to crackle, thick with anticipation and the tang of energized field projectors. Every seat was filled, every camera drone in the system was active. Billions of beings across the galaxy were watching. Oliver stood on the polished floor, Echo in his hand, its simple form a stark rebellion against the high-tech pageantry. Across from him stood Caius's final champion, his ultimate solution, a monster known only as the Praetorian. It was a thing of nightmares, a warrior so heavily augmented it was more machine than being. 8 feet tall, encased in a custom-built matte black version of the Aegis armor, its limbs pistoned with cybernetic strength. In its hands, it wielded a plasma scythe, the curved blade of incandescent energy humming with lethal power. It was science perfected for the sole purpose of killing. This was the final brutal argument for technological superiority. The starting siren shrieked. The Praetorian was a juggernaut, each swing of its plasma scythe carving sizzling arcs through the air. Oliver couldn't block the plasma, only dodge, weave, and parry the armored haft of the weapon. He deflected a blow, his blade meeting the cyborg's scythe haft. The impact sent a deep, resonant thrum through both weapons. The destructive vibration needed a clean strike, a moment for the blade's edge to sing to the material. A quick deflection wasn't enough to induce the catastrophic shatter. But Oliver could feel the enemy's weapon groaning under the strain. A subtle vibration of protest. He knew he'd have to land a solid, deliberate blow to bring it down. He fought with desperate, brilliant ingenuity. He scored a hit, a shallow slice across a hydraulic cable in the Praetorian's knee joint.
The cyborg staggered. He dodged a furious counterswing and slid, his blade biting deep into the exposed power pack on the back of the Praetorian's thigh. The leg seized up. The Praetorian was on the verge of defeat, kneeling on one knee, its plasma scythe sputtering. The crowd was roaring, a unified wave of sound for the human underdog. And in his skybox, high above the arena, Administrator Caius saw his entire empire crumbling, and he snapped. With no other options, enraged and desperate, Caius slammed his hand down on a red panel on his command console. "Security Protocol Omega. Execute," he commanded, his voice dead calm. The arena's festive lights turned a bloody, glaring red. Klaxons blared. With a series of thunderous booms, heavy blast doors slammed down over every exit, sealing the arena. The live broadcast feed was hijacked, replaced with a looping "System-wide crisis" alert. All external communications were jammed. The arena was now Caius's private killbox. "All Orion Core units converge on the central platform." Caius's voice echoed through the now sealed stadium. No longer the polite CEO, but a merciless tyrant. "Eliminate the human. No witnesses." Panels in the arena walls slid open, and dozens of heavily armed Orion Core soldiers rappelled to the floor. They formed a perimeter, their rifles aimed at Oliver. But Caius hadn't counted on Linnell. A roar of pure, undiluted rage erupted from the VIP stands. Fueled by the memory of her fallen student, Linnell Vaughn leaped over the balcony railing, a pulse rifle clutched in each of her 4 hands. She landed on the arena floor like a meteor, her 2 lower hands already firing before her feet touched the ground, carving a path through the first wave of soldiers. She fought her way to Oliver's side, tossing him one of her spare rifles. "Plans upgraded," she yelled over the cacophony of laser fire. "I like it, more dramatic," Oliver yelled back, opening fire. They stood back to back as she shouted into her comm. "Oliver, I'm heading for a security terminal, just like we planned. You need to get to Caius. Keep him occupied." She broke off, fighting her way toward a console near the arena wall, leaving Oliver and a few brave arena guards to hold the line. Oliver knew what he had to do. The chaos was his cover. Oliver took a running start, used a downed soldier's body as a springboard, and launched himself into the air. He snagged the landing strut of a camera drone, the machine whining as it strained under his weight. He swung from it, a pendulum of flesh and bone, and let go, his fingers catching the lip of a maintenance gantry 20 meters up. The impact jarred his shoulders, but he held on, the cold, greasy metal slick underneath his gloves. The climb was a vertical nightmare. He scrambled up the arena's steel skeleton, the battle raging below, a symphony of chaos and light. Laser fire stitched the air around him, the heat of near misses blistering the metal next to his face, the air smelling of burnt circuits. He swung on an exposed power conduit. It groaned under his weight, showering sparks, threatening to tear loose from its ancient moorings. His hand, slick with sweat, slipped on a beam. For a heart-stopping second, he dangled by one arm, the dizzying drop yawning beneath him, the sounds of the firefight distant and muted. With a grunt of exertion that tore at his throat, he found a new hold, his muscles screaming in protest. "He did it, Oliver!" Linnell's voice crackled in his ear, breathless and triumphant. "The arrogant fool bridged his network. I'm in. He left the master control system wide open. I'm getting everything, Oliver. His private files, the kill orders, the bounty, it's all here. Just buy me more time." Fueled by her words, Oliver pushed upward. He reached the skybox level, smashing through a reinforced window with Echo's pommel. Caius's 2 personal guards, cybernetic brutes like the Praetorian, turned to face him. He fought them in the tight confines of the corridor, a whirlwind of desperate motion, using the environment to his advantage before finally disabling them. He kicked down the final door and burst into the control room. Administrator Caius stood there, a high-caliber plasma pistol in his hand, his body protected by a wavering personal energy shield. "You are an infuriating variable, human," Caius hissed, raising his pistol. Oliver didn't charge. He threw Echo, not the blade, but the pommel. The heavy steel cap smashed into the shield's belt-mounted emitter. The shield collapsed. Before Caius could fire, Oliver was on him. A flick of his wrist sent the pistol clattering away. Another twist, and Caius was spun around. The cold, flat edge of Echo's blade laid against the soft skin of his throat. "You wanted an audience, Caius," Oliver panted, his voice raw. "You're gonna get one." He pressed the blade just hard enough to make a point. "You shut it down. Now you're gonna turn it back on. Every channel. Now." Trembling with fury and fear, Caius complied, his fingers dancing across the console. The system-wide crisis alert vanished from the monitors, replaced by the high-definition image of Caius himself, held hostage by the human he'd tried to murder. "Mr. Caius has a message for the galaxy," Oliver said, his voice amplified through the now live broadcast feed. Billions of viewers were treated to the shocking sight. "He'd like to confess," Oliver said, a hard smile on his face, "to attempted murder, conspiracy, and a few other things, but don't take my word for it." He nodded toward the comm unit. "Linnell, you there? Broadcasting live and galaxy-wide, kid." Linnell's voice crackled through the speakers, triumphant. "Uploading Caius's unedited security logs, financial records, and private comms. The ones where he orders the hits, sets the bounties, and approves the use of illegal stimulants. It's all going public. Happy retirement, Caius." The lockdown had bought Caius time to try and kill Oliver. It had also bought Concordant security time to bypass his jamming signals. The skybox doors burst open, and armed Concordant soldiers flooded the room. They saw the scene, the defeated CEO, the victorious human, and the incriminating evidence scrolling across the main view screen. A senior officer stepped forward. "Cadet Arkwright," she said, her voice filled with a respect he had never heard from an alien before. "We'll take it from here." Oliver lowered his sword. He looked down into the arena. The fighting had stopped. Linnell was standing amidst the smoking wreckage of Orion Corps' forces, all four of her arms raised in victory. The crowd, realizing what they had just witnessed, was no longer just cheering. They were chanting his name. He stood there, Echo held high, the simple blade catching the light. He had won the gauntlet. He had won the champion's prerogative, and his family's forge was safe. But he had done so much more. He was the champion. He was the human who had faced down a corrupt, galaxy-spanning megacorporation with nothing but skill, courage, and a backworld blade. On that day, humanity's reputation was forged anew in the heart of the fight, its resonance echoing across the stars for generations to come.